one of the holdings we have at the museum is, it's not even a holding from William Henry Hurd, but it's collections of things that we've gathered to represent William Henry Hurd. And as we go, I will talk about some of the things we've done and some of the things I'm working on for this particular display. But Hurd was born in Elbert County, and his year is 1850. He adopted, I think, June 25th, because in his book he says he was born during corn plowing time. So he was born, he had a mother who loved him, but they were slaves. He talks about, he wrote a book, and so that's how I know what I know about him. He talks about how many times he was sold, how many brothers and sisters. You know, there was an illness where his mom died and some of his siblings, but all along he had contact with his father, who lived several miles from where he was. So I think his world revolved around his father and mom when she was alive. So when he was born, he was not a whole person. As you heard Dr. Jelani talk, he was considered 3/5 a person. And that was something Congress concocted so that Georgia would have a population. It wouldn't just be the slave owners and their relatives. So that was just something, a political stunt, so that we would know slaves can't be a whole person, because if they were a whole person, they couldn't be a slave. I'm assuming that's how they thought. But when John Henry was 15, something miraculous happened. And it was under the leadership of Abe Lincoln. He found out that he was a free man. He was considered a whole man. So just imagine how happy, from slave to being a whole man, how he must have felt. But now when he found out he was free, he did not immediately leave that plantation, because I think he was sort of shocked and he didn't know what to think. And besides all that, you know, he's 15. He's still considered a child by today's standard. And even back then, he was more or less still a child. And so he stayed on the plantation a while, but eventually he thought to himself, why should I be here? And he walked away and he went to live with his father. And how did he celebrate his freedom? He did not go out drinking and carousing. He educated himself. He grabbed up some books. He had his daddy find him people to work for who would educate him. He said in his book that some Black people knew how to read and write when slavery ended, even though it was against the law for them to do so. He does not know how they learned to read and write, but he was determined that he would be amongst the people who could read and write. So when he worked for someone, part of his pay was education. They would help him with reading, writing, and math. And of course, as he became more educated, then he could educate others. So he became a teacher as well as other things. And one of the things he was involved in was politics. He ran for office as a state representative from Elbert County. And he says he lost that because of stolen ballots. Does that sound familiar? Stealing votes? And of course, back then he was a Republican. Why a Republican? Because Abe Lincoln was a Republican. That was when the parties were the opposite of what they are today. And so later on, he went to Abbeville, South Carolina, and ran for office again. And when he ran, he won. But of course, what did that mean for him? He had that position. It was not long lasted. He talked about something called the Red Shirt Campaign, where it was very bloody and people were out fighting, killing Black people and white people who sided with Black people so that they would not have power. So when he won, he went into office, and shortly thereafter, he was thrown out of office because President Andrew Johnson pulled all the troops out. He ended the Reconstruction era after slavery. And so there he was. He wanted to be a politician, but that was not working out for him. So here I've did a picture, and those other pictures are pictures that I've constructed working on a book and maybe a coloring book of William Henry Hurd for the younger people. But this would represent him being a whole man and him being elected into office to show that he was a citizen of the United States of America, a whole man, not part man. However, once he saw and felt like he could get nowhere in politics, he left it alone and went into ministry. And there he grew to have a very large name in the AME church. He became ambassador to Liberia, Africa for a short time. And he also was an author. And so as an author, one of the books he wrote is the book that I referred to earlier, where I've read and gotten out the information I needed for this presentation. The name of that book was From Slavery to the Bishopric. And so one of the reasons I'm so determined to do something on William Henry Hurd is that I find him so relevant today. All of the things going on are things that went on during his time period. I think about when he was born a slave and what that must have been like. And then later on to be a free man. You know, what did that feel like for him? It had to be, you know, he had the world open before him. But of course, when Reconstruction ended, a lot of the hope, you would think, ended as well. But he did not give up. He kept moving. He kept finding openings where he could make a difference. He continued his journey of improving himself. He continued his journey of trying to help other African Americans and Africans. He continued his journey with determination and maybe some foresight. He never voted because, of course, he died in 1937. So whenever a politician changed, then the laws changed and he was at the mercy of others because he never had that opportunity to vote. And so here we have this man who did some great things in his time, you know, from slave to a whole man. And then you got this Jim Crow era that controlled his every whim. He loved traveling to Europe because in Europe, he had a little more leeway. But right before he died, there was a hotel that he stayed at often when he would go. But this one time, they would not allow him to stay there. Why? Because white people were sick of all those black people milling around. And so he had to leave those accommodations and go elsewhere. So how disappointing that must have felt for him to be put in his place, so to say. So from slave to being a whole man with the world open up to him. and then Jim Crow, where all of that is snatched away. And he has just a little room to maneuver around in. At the museum, we have a wall that we've dedicated to him. Some of the things are things that we think would have been in existence during his time, because we have nothing that he personally owned. We have pictures of him, and the pictures that you've seen in this presentation are pictures that I've modified. This picture of him as a young 15-year-old, it's where I've taken some of his features, like his eyes, his nose, eyebrows, and so forth, just basic things, and changed the age, so to say. So here, he obviously looks very young. And then in this picture, this is just 100% made up picture, because I would have no idea what his mother looked like, or what his appearance would have been as a baby. So those are some of the things I'm working on with him. Eventually, I hope to be able to present a book on him, and with lots of pictures, because it would be geared towards younger children. And I would also like to present a coloring book that I've been working on. So of course, you know, when you like everything to look a certain way, you take your time, and hopefully it will come to be at some point when I think it's good enough to present to the public. Does anyone have any questions about the museum or about William Henry Hurd?